Picture this. It's January 7th, 1945. The Battle of the Bulge is still raging, and Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, Britain's most famous general, is about to make the biggest PR mistake of his career. He's standing before a room full of journalists, cameras rolling, and he's about to claim credit for saving the American army from disaster. What he doesn't know is that Winston Churchill is watching, and the Prime Minister is absolutely livid. What Churchill said behind closed doors would reveal just how fragile the Allied alliance really was, and how one man's ego nearly tore it all apart. If you love untold stories from World War II, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because we're diving deep into the moments that shaped history. To understand why Churchill was so furious, we need to go back 3 weeks earlier, December 16, 1944. The Germans launched their last massive offensive in the West, what we now call the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler throws everything he has left at the Americans in the Ardennes forest. It's a desperate gamble to split the Allied forces and reach the port of Antwerp. The American lines buckle. Entire divisions are surrounded. At Bastogne, the 101st Airborne is encircled and running out of ammunition. It's chaos. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, makes a crucial decision. He needs to reorganize the command structure. The German breakthrough has split the American First Army from the Third Army. Communication lines are cut. Bradley can't effectively command forces on the northern side of the Bulge. So Eisenhower does something extraordinary. He temporarily puts 2 American armies under British command. Montgomery takes control of the U.S. 1st and 9th Armies north of the Bulge. Now, here's what you need to understand. This was a purely practical decision. The Americans were still doing the fighting. They were still dying by the thousands in the frozen forests. Montgomery was coordinating, not commanding the battle in any meaningful tactical sense. But Montgomery saw it differently. January 7, 1945. Montgomery calls a press conference at his headquarters. The Battle of the Bulge is essentially over. The Germans are in full retreat. It's been the bloodiest battle American forces have ever fought, with over 19,000 Americans killed. And Montgomery is about to take a victory lap. He stands before the assembled journalists, British, American, and international press, with that slight smile he's famous for, and he begins to speak. "The battle has been most interesting," he says, as if discussing a cricket match. "I think possibly one of the most interesting and tricky battles I have ever handled." Handled. That word would echo through Allied headquarters like a gunshot. He continues, "The first thing to be done was to head off the German attack. I employed the whole available power of the British group of armies. You thus have the picture of British troops fighting on both sides of American forces who have suffered a hard blow." He paints a picture of confusion and near disaster among American forces, with the British steadying the line and organizing the defense. He praises American soldiers, fighting very bravely, but the subtext is clear. They needed British leadership to save them. One journalist asks about Eisenhower. Montgomery's response is telling. "Eisenhower placed me in command of the whole northern front. I employed the whole available power of the British group of armies. This was a proper thing to do." A proper thing to do. The implication? That perhaps it should have been done sooner, that perhaps Montgomery should be in charge more often. The American reporters in the room are stunned. They know what they've just witnessed. Montgomery has essentially claimed credit for an American victory, and worse, he's implied that American command was inadequate. The reaction in American headquarters is volcanic. General Omar Bradley, whose armies had been temporarily under Montgomery's command, is absolutely furious. He tells Eisenhower that he cannot serve under Montgomery again, and if forced to do so, he'll ask to be sent home. General George S. Patton is even more blunt. He writes in his diary that Montgomery is a tired little fart trying to steal American glory. Patton, never one for diplomatic language, wants to challenge Montgomery to a duel. But it's not just the generals. American war correspondents are outraged. They've been in the Ardennes. They've seen American soldiers freeze to death in foxholes, fight house to house in burning villages, and die by the thousands stopping the German advance. And now some British field marshal is taking credit for their sacrifice? The story hits American newspapers like a bombshell. Headlines scream about British arrogance. Radio commentators question the alliance. There's talk in Congress about withdrawing American forces from British command entirely. The alliance, the thing that's been holding the Western Front together for nearly 3 years, is suddenly in jeopardy. And that's when Churchill steps in. Churchill is in London when he hears about Montgomery's press conference. According to those present, his reaction is immediate and explosive. "That damn fool," he reportedly shouts. "That insufferable, preening damn fool." But Churchill's anger isn't just about Montgomery's ego, though God knows there's plenty of that. It's about something far more dangerous, the survival of the alliance. Churchill understands something Montgomery apparently doesn't. Britain is the junior partner now. The Americans are providing the bulk of the men, the equipment, the supplies. Britain is exhausted after 5 years of war. If the Americans decide they're tired of British condescension, they could effectively sideline Britain entirely. Even worse, Stalin is watching from the east. Any sign of division between the Western allies is ammunition for Soviet propaganda and leverage in post-war negotiations. Churchill immediately calls a meeting with his military chiefs and political advisors. What he says in that room, and in subsequent conversations, reveals just how seriously he takes this crisis. Montgomery has threatened the whole alliance with his vanity, Churchill tells one advisor. He may have undone in one afternoon what we've spent 3 years building. To another, he's even more blunt. If we're not careful, Monty will have us fighting the Americans instead of the Germans. Now here's where it gets really interesting, because what Churchill said privately about Montgomery goes far beyond just damage control. It reveals his true feelings about the field marshal and the dangerous game of national pride. In a heated conversation with his chief of the Imperial General Staff, Field Marshal Alan Brooke, who happened to be Montgomery's biggest supporter, Churchill unleashes. "Monty seems to think this is about British glory," Churchill says. "But we're not fighting this war for glory, we're fighting for survival. And right now, our survival depends on American goodwill." He continues, "What Monty doesn't seem to grasp is that the Americans saved us when we stood alone. They kept us supplied when we were starving. They're dying in their tens of thousands in battles we can no longer fight ourselves. And now he has the audacity, the sheer breathtaking audacity to suggest he saved them." Brooke tries to defend Montgomery, arguing that technically Montgomery did coordinate the northern defense. Churchill cuts him off. "I don't give a damn about technically. The Americans bled in the Ardennes. They died in numbers that would shock the British public if they knew. And Montgomery stands there like a peacock taking bows? It's not just wrong, it's dangerous." But perhaps Churchill's most revealing statement comes in a private letter he drafts, though ultimately doesn't send to Montgomery himself. In it, he writes, "Your remarks have caused grave damage to Allied unity at a critical juncture. The Americans are not our subordinates to be patronized and corrected. They are our partners, our saviors in many respects, and increasingly the dominant force in this alliance. Your inability to grasp this reality suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of our strategic position." He continues, "I cannot and will not allow British self-promotion to fracture this alliance. American victories will not be rewritten for British pride. If you cannot conduct yourself with the humility and tact that our position demands, then your services, however distinguished, may become a liability we cannot afford." That last line is crucial. Churchill, the man who stood alone against Hitler in 1940, is essentially telling Britain's most famous general that he's expendable if he threatens the alliance. For several days, the situation teeters on the edge. American newspapers are calling for Montgomery's dismissal. British papers defend their hero. The Atlantic Alliance is showing cracks that German propagandists are gleefully exploiting. Churchill knows he has to act decisively, but he also has to be careful. Montgomery is enormously popular in Britain. Firing him or publicly rebuking him could cause a political crisis at home. So Churchill does something brilliant. he outmaneuvers Montgomery without ever confronting him directly. First, he arranges for Montgomery to send a private letter of appreciation to Eisenhower, praising American troops and clarifying his remarks. Montgomery, under immense pressure, complies, though the letter is notably stiff and formal. Then Churchill does something more dramatic. On January 18, 1945, Churchill stands before the House of Commons to address the situation. What he says is a masterclass in diplomacy, alliance management, and subtle rebuke. He begins by praising American forces in the Battle of the Bulge, describing their courage in lavish detail. He talks about the 101st Airborne holding Bastogne against impossible odds. He mentions the incredible resilience of American forces in stopping the German advance. Then he says this, and every word is chosen with surgical precision. I have seen it suggested that the terrific battle which has been proceeding since December 16th on the American front is an Anglo-American battle. In fact, however, the United States troops have done almost all the fighting and have suffered almost all the losses. Only one British Army Corps has been engaged in this action. All the rest of the 30 or so divisions which have been fighting continuously for the last month are United States troops. Pause on that for a moment. Churchill is systematically dismantling Montgomery's narrative before Parliament, before the British people, before the world. He continues, "The Americans have engaged 30 or 40 men for every one we have engaged, and they have lost 60 to 80 men for every one of ours. Care must be taken not to claim for the British armies an undue share of what is undoubtedly the greatest American battle of the war." And then the subtle knife twist. "I never hesitate to stand up for our own soldiers when their achievements have been cold-shouldered or neglected or overshadowed, as they sometimes are. But we must not forget that it is to American homes that the telegrams of personal loss and anxiety have been going during the past month." Every British MP in that chamber knows exactly who Churchill is talking about. He's defending American honor and in the process publicly correcting Montgomery without ever mentioning his name. Churchill's speech works. American newspapers print his remarks with headlines praising British fairness. Eisenhower personally thanks Churchill for his intervention. The crisis begins to subside. But the damage to Montgomery's reputation, particularly with the Americans, is permanent. From this point forward, American generals view him with deep suspicion. When major commands are assigned for the final push into Germany, Montgomery's influence is notably reduced. More importantly, Churchill's actions send a clear message throughout the British command structure. The alliance comes first. National pride, personal glory, even military reputation, all of these are secondary to maintaining unity with the Americans. Behind closed doors, Churchill's assessment of Montgomery becomes even harsher. He refers to him as a problem we must manage and a brilliant tactician who cannot see beyond his own battlefield. In one particularly telling moment, Churchill confides to his personal secretary, "Montgomery won at El Alamein, and he's been dining on it ever since. But he doesn't understand that we've moved beyond the days when Britain could win this war alone. Those days, if they ever existed, are long gone." So why does this matter? Why should we care about an 80-year-old spat between generals? Because this moment reveals something crucial about how World War II was actually won, and it's not the Hollywood version. The Allies didn't win because they were naturally unified. They didn't win because everyone got along. They won despite massive egos, national rivalries, and strategic disagreements that sometimes bordered on sabotage. What saved the alliance wasn't friendship, it was leadership. Leaders like Churchill who understood that winning the war meant swallowing national pride. Leaders who understood that the Americans didn't save Europe in 1944-45 as a favor to Britain, but as partners in a shared fight against genuine evil. Montgomery's press conference could have fractured that partnership. Churchill's response saved it. And here's the really sobering part. Churchill was right to be worried. After the war, when historians examined German intelligence reports from this period, they found that Nazi propagandists had jumped on the Montgomery controversy. They were broadcasting to German troops that the alliance was falling apart, that Americans and British were turning on each other. For a brief moment, German morale, which had been in free fall, stabilized slightly. The propaganda gave them hope that maybe, just maybe, the alliance would crack before Germany was completely defeated. It didn't crack, largely because Churchill refused to let it. In the end, Montgomery remained in command. He would lead British forces across the Rhine and accept the German surrender in northern Germany. His place in history as one of Britain's great generals is secure. But his relationship with American commanders never recovered, and his ambitions to be the supreme Allied commander, the overall leader of Western forces, died in that press conference on January 7, 1945. Churchill's message was clear. British self-promotion could not be allowed to fracture the alliance. American victories would not be rewritten for British pride. And any British officer, no matter how distinguished, who couldn't understand that reality was a threat to the war effort itself. It's a lesson in leadership, humility, and the hard choices that come with managing alliances in war. Churchill understood that being right didn't matter. Being tactful didn't even matter that much. What mattered was keeping the Americans committed to the fight. Everything else was negotiable. The next time you hear about Allied unity in World War II, remember, it wasn't inevitable. It was built, maintained, and sometimes rescued by leaders who understood what was at stake. And sometimes it was saved by an angry prime minister who knew when to put a field marshal in his place. If this story opened your eyes to the real drama behind World War II, smash that like button and subscribe for more untold history. Drop a comment below. Do you think Montgomery deserved Churchill's rebuke, or was he just being honest about his role? Let's discuss.